Good evening, everybody. Such a polite audience. Like I walk up here and everyone stops talking. Wow. Everybody, thanks for coming to our latest IndyTalks. That's a series of conversations, as some of you know, put on by the Nevada Independent. If you don't know, I'm John Ralston. I'm the CEO. We're about, by the way, in case any you can clap if you want. It's fine. We're about to turn 5 years old. This has been the greatest ride of my professional life, working with the best people that I have ever worked with. And they have embraced our goal, which is to help people understand what's happening in their community, their state. We hope that these kinds of discussions, as the one we're about to have, are as valuable as the deeply reported and contextual stories on the site. I say it a lot, and I really do mean it. I could not be prouder of this staff, and our editor, Elizabeth Thompson, is here too. She's right here. And she leads the best team in journalism that I've ever worked with. I hope you agree, and for those of you here tonight or watching on the live stream, and by the way, there's a lot of people watching on the live stream. If you like what we're doing, go on the site and hit that big donate button. People are used to hearing me saying that. That's why the laughter. We're a nonprofit, though, and we only survive because of the kindness of our donors. That's the only sales pitch I'll make tonight. Well, maybe. As always, I want to thank the wonderful folks at the Smith Center. This is such a great venue. Elizabeth and I love being here. Thanks to Myron Martin for letting us be in his house. He has been very supportive of us ever since we've launched. We've done a number of events in this room and in Reynolds Hall, and we just love this venue so much. I also want to thank our sponsors tonight. Touro University, Shelley Berkeley has been a huge supporter of the Indy. Core Construction, Russell Rose Law Group, and Study.com. No, Shelley, no speeches from you. No speeches, I'm sorry. So tonight, as all of you know, we're pleased to welcome Chancellor Melody Rose to the stage. In case you don't know much about the Chancellor, she has a BA in politics from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and 3 advanced degrees from Cornell University. As I've said many times when I was there in Ithaca, New York, long before the Chancellor got there, go Big Red. And that, yeah, all right. It's the nicest thing I'll say to her all night, trust me. So Rose has been Chancellor for about 1.5 years now. She came from Oregon, where she had a lot of different roles there, including Chancellor of the Oregon University system. And I have to tell you, I kind of find this interesting. The Chancellor chose to go from one state that has legalized pot to another state that has legalized pot. Can anyone blame her, all things considered? Joining me tonight is going to be Jacob Solis, who has dived deeply into the higher ed beat and is producing the kind of in-depth coverage that we have become known for. Jacob's going to take the lead in questioning the Chancellor tonight. But I want everyone in this room to know, and I think Elizabeth has passed around cards, and also on the live stream where you can put questions in the chat. We're going to spend about an hour in a conversation with the Chancellor, and if questions come up, fill out the cards, or if you're on the live stream, go in the chat, because we're going to get to as many of those as we can in the final half hour. I want to thank the Chancellor for being here tonight. She really didn't have to do this, especially at this point in her tenure. And speaking of that, I want everyone who's here and watching on the live stream to know that the Chancellor can't answer any specific questions about that hostile work environment complaint she's filed, which many of you surely know a lot about, and I promised her that we would not do that. What she wrote in that complaint has to stand for now, at least. I'm sure you all understand that. And you know what? I know a good place where you can read all about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chancellor Rose and Jacob to the stage. So as I said, Chancellor, I'm going to let Jacob take the lead because he actually knows what he's talking about as opposed to me. But I have to start by asking you a simple question. I'll start with a softball, okay? The COVID controversy at the university system and elsewhere, the work environment there, all of the budget cuts. Why are you still here?
I am here because I have the best job in the state of Nevada.
No, really, come on.
No, truly.
Come on.
Truly, I say that, and it's not hyperbole. To be an advocate on behalf of 107,000 students across this state is the most unbelievable privilege of a lifetime. And of course there are going to be challenges. We've, gone through a global health crisis, which is still ongoing. We have experienced major economic setbacks as a state as a consequence of that. We're going through a racial reckoning that is long overdue, and we're facing environmental catastrophe as a world. And so there are no shortages of challenge. But as you read my resume, you will be aware that I tend to be the person who runs into the Bernie building. And with purpose, not with recklessness, but because I believe, as a first-generation college student, that there is no higher purpose for me than serving those 107,000 students and opening doors for them like the doors that were open for me.
There's not been one moment during the last year, June of year and a half, June of 2020, I believe this was when you said, "Why did I come to Nevada?"
Only when it was 117.
That's a good answer. All right, Jacob, take it away.
All right, well, I do want to get to, COVID and the budget cuts and everything that you mentioned. But first, I do want to start with your resume and your background, because you cut your teeth in Oregon. You spent decades there, first as faculty, then as administrator, then as, chancellor of the Oregon system. So, you're coming to Nevada, which has its idiosyncrasies, right? It's a bit of a weird state, so especially with higher ed. And I'm just curious, how do you think that out-of-state experience has shaped the way that you've approached the job when you got to Nevada?
That's a really interesting question, and I think that every state has its idiosyncrasies, and part of the reason my husband and I chose to make this journey is that we were ready for change. The last kid was tucked in safely, we think safely, during COVID in a dorm in the college of her choice, and we were ready for an adventure and ready for change after serving in Oregon for 25 years. And so I was very excited to have this opportunity. And I would say that, the challenge here, if I could boil it down, is to create a college-going culture. So we can talk about budget woes, we can talk about changes in the business model, we can talk about all of those things, but truly, the number one thing that attracted me to this opportunity is the fact that we have of high school seniors, which is to say we're typically ranked 46, 47, 48 out of 50 states for the percentage of high school graduates who matriculate directly into higher education. And to me, that's an important problem to solve because it is cultural, right? It's about the idiosyncrasies. And I embrace those idiosyncrasies because it's a learning opportunity for me. And frankly, I think because I've had experience in other states, first in Oregon and then as a consultant nationally, I have some experiences to bring to bear on the challenges that we have here. And I think that for the most part, those experiences have been welcomed because they're a fresh perspective. I have no dog in the fight. I just have an eye to the mission for those 7,000 students I keep mentioning.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the college-going culture because I did want to bring up the fact that Nevada is 47th in the country when it comes to the percentage of its population with a college degree. And obviously, for decades, it's not a secret why that is, right? Nevada's economy is Nevada's economy. And so much of it revolves around gaming and the way that the jobs come from that economy. So absent some kind of seismic shift in the way that Southern Nevada operates on an economic level, I mean, how do you change that college-going culture in a way that materially changes the number of high school students that are going to Nevada colleges?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, we need that seismic shift. Let's be honest, right? We've been through two of the worst economic downturns in American history in the past decade. So if that is not an opportunity for seismic change, I fear, what is. And so I certainly sense the conversation here, especially in Southern Nevada, where we did not necessarily make the kinds of changes that were necessary after the Great Recession. The conversation here is shifting. We hear an awful lot about the demands for workforce, short-term credentials, low credit-bearing opportunities, so that we can redeploy a workforce that may never fully be picked back up by the hospitality sector. And to me, I see that as opportunity. And it has to come through partnership. It has to come through change. There's nothing easy about it, but it must happen. And then on top of that, I would say there's a cultural feature to all of this too. And it's something that I really love. One of the things that I bring is that I come from a state that truly believes in the educational continuum. In Oregon, we talk about it as cradle to career. So to really understand that education builds on itself from a child's formative years all the way through postgraduate education, maybe popping into the workforce, coming back to college when you need to retool or have a new opportunity. That mindset also happens to be shared by our state superintendent, Joan Ebert, who I will tell you straight up was the first friend I made when I moved here, because we both have that vision of education being a continuous cycle where there are no breaks or breaches in the pipeline. And in order to create that, you have to work in partnership, and you have to be willing, as chancellor, to go into classrooms of second graders and fifth graders and begin to talk to them about what it means to go to college. And I'm a pretty good poster child for that. So to be able to tell, kids who are 8 years old in a second grade classroom, we're ready for you in 10 years. And to try and anticipate their needs 10 years out is a pretty exciting proposition. And so, whether you're part of the wolf pack or you're a rebel, when you're in second grade, we're going to be thinking about you, and we're going to be thinking about what your needs will be 10 years from now at our institutions.
Can I just jump in real quickly, Jacob? First of all, I think, Chancellor, we can turn all the lights off because I'm just blinded by your shining optimism up here. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
But Jacob, as I knew he would, touched on what I think is the most salient overall point. And you even mentioned that the college-going culture, the whole culture of Nevada, it's been a frustrating thing for me. My dad was a university professor.
I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly. You have no idea. The letters he wrote to chancellors back in New York or something. But a serious question here is, Nevada's not Oregon. And there is a different culture overall here that I've always felt didn't value education enough, whether it was lower or higher education. Mm-hmm. And as sunny as you may be, it's going to take more than that. What is it going to take that's turning around the battleship kind of chore, mm-hmm. right?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you might have noticed, I'm maybe sunny, but I'm also relentless. And I'm relentlessly optimistic about this because it has to be. And so part of the cultural shift is really getting into communities and making the case for change. Making the case. Why should you go, miss out on 4 years of earning opportunity in order to be in a classroom and get a piece of paper when you cross the stage from me? And there are a lot of answers that I think we need to sell better than we have before. So there are obviously the economic incentives, right? So I can talk to you about the value of a college degree. The average college degree will earn you $1 million more across your earning lifetime than if you had finished or stopped out after high school. So straight up $1 million should sound pretty good to most people. But it's more than that, right? There's more than just the pecuniary interest in a higher wage to getting a college degree. There are all of the social benefits that redound to communities that are well educated. everything from lower crime rates, lower dependency on social services, more community engagement. There are social indicators of health that spike when you get more education. So the benefits are many, and it's incumbent upon people like me and my team of amazing leaders at system administration and the 8 great presidents. It is incumbent upon us to make the case in a way that is perhaps more clear, more compelling than we've been able to do in the past. And frankly, we are the key to economic diversification. So when I hear from my friends at GoEd and OWN and all of the other agencies working on diversification of the Southern Nevada economy, we're your solution. Because as you look to bring new companies into our communities, what are the questions they ask leaders? They say, where are my kids going to go to school? Where are they going to learn? Can I experience social events? Can I experience the arts in my communities? And obviously, higher education provides all of that and more.
When they ask about social events, they were talking about events like tonight, right?
Obviously, you're the key. You're the key to economic diversification, John.
Okay, we're done. No, go ahead, Jacob. I'm kidding.
So I wanted to follow up on, you mentioned this 10-year timeline that you want to create this college-going culture, you want to bring Nevadans into Nevada colleges and universities. But when we talk about enrollment in national universities, certainly there's this thing, an idea, the enrollment cliff, right? That there's demographic changes that stem from the Great Recession that are going to hit colleges in the next 10 to 15 years that are going to decimate enrollment. Now, Nevada is in the West, which is expected to fare better than places like the Midwest or the South or what have you. But there are still the sort of demographic implications of something like a recession, of something like the coronavirus. And so how can you plan 10 years down the road that, I'll phrase it this way. How can you have this expectation that, more Nevadans are going to go to college, that more Nevadans are going to enroll in Nevada schools because you're delivering the message? I mean, how do you sell to a smaller and smaller population and actually grow the colleges when that population is getting smaller all the time?
So first of all, the demographic decline has already begun. So let me set the stage a little bit. We have fewer college students going to our campuses nationally every year for the last decade. So that aggregate decline is already well underway, and it's expected to accelerate in 2026. Why? Because that's when the folks who were born during the Great Recession would be expected to show up on our campuses. Birth rate went down in 2008. The whole nation expected it would pop back up. It never did. And in fact, with this most recent economic downturn, the decline in the birth rate accelerated. So that's the aggregate. There's a reason I didn't apply to jobs in the Midwest and the upper Northeast. Why? Because that is where the pain of this economic or birth decline is accelerating the most. And not only are their birth rates accelerating at a higher rate, they are also all moving from there to here. So I'm not a dummy. I realize this is a growth state. And it's a growth state both because of in-migration and because our particular demographics have higher than average birth rates. So there's a bet to be made on the state of Nevada that our enrollment will be far more stable than most states in the nation. So when you take that, you also have to break down, when I talk about aggregate demographics, let's face it, for most of American history, the vast majority of American college-going students have been white, middle, and upper middle class students. That is the demographic that is in the steepest decline nationally. So what we need to do, if we're being strategic about enrollment management, is look to the populations that are growth opportunities. And there are several, and they benefit us. So the Latinx population, for example, is growing, and they don't have the historic deep ties to higher education than other populations have had. So we have a strategic opportunity there. around equity, done well, done thoughtfully, to increase the percentage of those families that are seeking out higher education and bring more people into college. The other population that is absolutely vital to the future of this nation are adults with some college but no degree. And that population requires special attention, special supports. They need different things than your average 18-year-old needs when they walk onto campus. But that, again, is an unmet need. And how do I know this? I know this because there are new universities being founded right now. And they're responding to a market opportunity because traditional higher education isn't doing it. So when I say I'm optimistic, it's because I understand where the growth opportunities are, and we have certified smart people on every one of our campuses who will appreciate this too, and who will focus on those populations with unmet need that we can uniquely solve.
So when we talk about these students, these possible students who aren't being serviced by the system as it exists right now, I think about cost, right? So what is the value proposition? You know, we talk about, populations that are historically not served by higher education. One of the reasons they're not served is because there's a cost barrier to higher education, especially at the university level. And so Nevada, compared regionally, right, it's no California. It is a value proposition compared to other states. But that's not to say that tens of thousands of dollars over the lifetime of a degree is still not a lot of money. So how do you serve those populations when you still have to pay thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, in order to get that degree at the end of the day?
Well, I think that's a really important question, and we can't be callous about this, right? Because it's one thing to say, well, it's not that much money relative to other colleges or universities, but it's a lot of money to a low-income family, especially if you're a low-income family like mine with no historic ties to higher education, right? So it's a why. And I think the answer has to be that we have a profound obligation to reconsider our business model and to understand ways to bend the cost curve. Because we know that there are certain things about college-going populations that are going to shift in terms of needs. So I'll give some examples, right? My two youngest children are currently matriculated at a very research-intensive, traditional public university, and they enjoy the rock walls, they enjoy big football, they enjoy lazy rivers, they enjoy shuttles to go skiing after class on Thursdays and Fridays. That's what they want because they're 20 and 21 years old. If we're talking about trying to meet the needs of students with a different profile altogether, we have to get real about who those students are and what they need from us. And so addressing that question of what they need from us, I'll tell you, my colleague, Dr. Brooks, who is here tonight, and I were talking to some students up north a week ago, and we asked, what are your barriers? And I heard 3 barriers, which I know because I do this every day, but certainly were not part of a conversation 100 years ago when I went to UC Santa Cruz. The barriers were, I need public transit, right? I need a bus pass for free, because otherwise I can't get to class. I need a child care opportunity for my little ones so I know they're safe and well cared for while I'm in class. And actually, I might need food from the food pantry because I'm food insecure. Those are 3 demands that current and future students are going to place on us that we have not addressed as a system nationally. And so I think we need to pivot in terms of what we are looking at in terms of services and needs of our students, and we have to do much, much more in partnership, much, much more. And that's a whole conversation by itself, but can't be overlooked.
Right, well, you bring up these services and delivering what students need as a college experience, food insecurity, transportation, really critical issues for getting an education. When we talk about delivering those things that aren't delivered right now, cost is a limiting factor here. And certainly, and she didn't escape this last legislative session without a little bit of pain. And $76 million in operational cuts spread over the next 2 years, or this year and next year, I should say. So with that being said, I mean, cost barriers being what they are, you know, the system's not getting any more money, it's getting less money. How do you address those problems in this environment?
Well, it's getting less money in terms of state appropriation, but I will say we're really grateful to have the kind of federal relief that has come our way to the whole industry in the last year and a half. It's been remarkable and has made a really big difference in our ability to meet the students' needs. And you all know, of course, that much of that federal relief went directly to students. So they were able to use that immediate relief in whatever way they needed, whether that was to backfill from a job loss, whether that was transportation, food, et cetera. So really important. We also know it's going to go away. Eventually, it's gone. And so we have to be prepared for that. And let me tell you this, I want my $76 million back. I do. Thank you. And here's the reason. You know, $76 million sounds like a ton of money, right? And it's just an abstract number. But you have to understand what that means on our campuses. So the Board of Regents set an intention a few years ago before my arrival around the ratio between advisors and students, because we know this is one of the most critical levers that we can pull for student retention and completion, is to increase the number of advisors that they have access to provide guidance, to be a shoulder, to support and mentor. And they sent an intention around really alleviating that barrier to student success. And part of what we are missing in that $76 million is more advisors. Part of what we are missing in that $76 million is healthcare services. Part of what we're missing are lower class sizes. Every single one of those dollars would have been dedicated to student success. So it's not just some abstract number. This is about real students who deserve the best that we can give them. And so we are relentlessly pursuing our backfill of that $76 million in addition to other strategic initiatives. And we'll be back. We'll live to fight another day.
Let me ask something about that, Jacob, because you mentioned, Chancellor, to your credit, that this federal money, it's just kind of an artificial high, right? It's going to be gone, like that pot you smoke in Oregon and Nevada. So
I have to stop you right there.
Okay.
Because this is true. I might be the only person from Oregon who has never smoked pot.
I think I'm the only person from Nevada, by the way, and it's a true story. But seriously, you say you're relentlessly pursuing it, and you've talked about your relentlessness a couple of times. I have no doubt that you're relentless. But how are you going to get that money? What are you going to do? What does this relentlessness encompass? I know I saw Constance Brooks here. She is very familiar with the legislative process, and you have people who understand how that works, maybe. I don't know if anybody does. How are you going to get that money back? And one other just corollary to that, and I bring up my dad again, who was very involved in education and higher education, involved with a lot of organizations. He used to tell me, you got to be able to pay faculty to get really high quality faculty to come here, so you burnish the reputation of the university. That costs a lot of money, a lot more now than it ever has, right? So what does relentlessly pursuing all of this mean? It sounds good.
Well, I think you'll have to watch us work. And, you know, I can describe it, but it will be more impactful, I think, to observe the actions that you'll see in the coming months and years. So, you know, on a state level, of course, we are pursuing some strategic investments through the ARPA process and the treasurer's process. And while those may be one-time dollars, we're being very smart about looking for investments that may be one-shot investments, but that pay dividends for years. So oftentimes, of course, that's capital. whether it's a building or equipment in a nursing program or a dentistry program. Those may be one-shot dollars, but they improve the student and the faculty experience for many years to come. So we're being smart about those one-time monies here at the state level. In addition, I'm very pleased to have a new team helping us on the federal level. One of the very first criticisms I heard on my arrival is that we don't bring enough dollars from the feds into the state of Nevada. Well, let's get a team, let's build a strategy for that, and we have done that. And of course, the ink is nowhere near dry on some of those requests in DC. Constance, whom you mentioned, and Constance and I will be back in DC in a few weeks, walking the halls looking for our federal infusions that are, again, maybe one-shot dollars, but can very much transform a laboratory for faculty, students, staff. And that's, again, one-shot money. In terms of building a budget, operations, and so forth, for state appropriations, again, there's no panacea. It's not like I'm a unicorn and I bring some fairy dust along with me to change the situation. It takes hard work. It takes us using every effective messenger within our team to build the case and, frankly, to humanize it. Like the example of the $76 million, right? That is just a number until you understand that some student really needs an advising appointment and it's going to take more days than it should. Or you've got faculty members. I remember very clearly having compression issues in our salary as a faculty member. I remember being department chair and hiring brand new, shiny PhDs into our department at higher salaries than I was making. So that's demoralizing. You lose your faculty over that, and ultimately we have to solve those problems, but it's not going to happen in 1 year.
So let me just push back just a little bit with all due respect.
That's your job.
Yes. So it was easier when you and Constance went to Washington, or whoever goes to Washington, when you had a guy who was the Senate Majority Leader and could free up those funds for you. We don't have much seniority back there anymore, so it's going to be more difficult to get that kind of money. The higher ed system has, for every year I've covered the legislature, I don't even want to tell you when I started, has gotten short shrift because it is placed secondary to lower education. That's something else that you have to deal with, and I know Constance would back me up on this. So it's going to take more than your charm and your relentless personality, as charming
Maybe
and
you
relentless.
could come with us.
Well, how much money you got?
Not much.
Exactly. So I'm pushing back only to say that I believe your intentions are good. I believe your relentlessness is good. I believe you want to help here. But the obstacles to what you're talking about are immense.
Yep.
They're immense.
They are, and they have been my entire career. This is not my first rodeo. So the obstacles that you name aren't unique. They don't surprise me, and they don't scare me. They just need to be met with as much intention and charm and strategy and well-articulated goals as you can muster. And frankly, at the end of the day, the state has to decide, are we going to be serious about this or not? And so I will be as compelling as I can be. Our 8 amazing presidents make an incredible case everywhere they go. Our team does internally, and our regents are out there advocating for us as well. But at the end of the day, the state has to reckon with these challenges and really ask itself, do we want to transform? Do we want to diversify our economy? Because I'm telling you, diversification of the economy cannot happen at the level that we talk about without investment in higher ed. And ultimately, that will be up to the state.
Well, one last question on this budget stuff, because You know, the budget for NSHE has not really recovered since cuts made during the Great Recession, even with sort of economic rebounding that happened in the decade after. And even under those conditions, we've heard legislators argue that NSHE still has $1 billion budget, that NSHE gets a lot of money, that all the institutions get a lot of money, and how well is that money spent? So what is your argument then to increase the slice of the pie when NSHE's budget is already quite large?
It is large because we're a massive organization. So if you do the comparative analysis, which I'm sure that you have, we get a state appropriation that is right around the national average per pupil. So nothing to knock your socks off, but something we're incredibly grateful for because it makes all that we do possible. The question is, do we want to provide even more than we are currently doing? And if so, it requires investment. So the case, of course, is the one I keep making here tonight, which is that you are not going to diversify your economy. You are not going to have the transformative opportunity with people's lives without further prioritization. And for sure, that takes champions, that takes consistency too. And those are hard won. We had the same challenges in Oregon. This is not unique to Nevada, but the solutions will be unique to Nevada. So I would argue that part of the reason we're entering into strategic planning is that we have to develop more friends, which a good strategic planning process will do, right? It's not just about the outcome of a fancy program. It's about the development of advocates along the way. And we have to be much more creative in public-private partnerships. And this is where I think there is a lot of upside potential in the state of Nevada, a lot of untapped potential for those kinds of creative agreements with private entities that can supply part of what we need and go a long way to alleviating some of the dependency on state appropriation.
Just real quickly, Jacob, I know you want to move on to some other stuff, but now you brought up some other issues, Chancellor, and you mentioned it several times, and I've heard this forever. We need more public-private partnerships. The opportunity is here. Give us some specific examples of what opportunities you see here that could help the university system public-private partnerships.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I would say look around the country at what's going on. One of the challenges or opportunities, depending on your point of view, of higher ed right now is there are major corporate interests who are saying, you know, we're going to develop our own educational programming internal, right? Walmart, Starbucks, you name it. Really smart play is to figure out how to work with those corporate partners so that the experts from our institutions can deliver the content, the curriculum, the instruction. And I think we have a lot of opportunity. Look at the corporate opportunities that we have in Nevada to do just that. I spent a day up at Tesla a few months back talking with Chris Riley about expanding our agreement with them. Huge upside potential. We have an agreement down here in Southern Nevada with MGM that's just really was getting started right before COVID hit and had a setback because of that. But a lot of intention on both sides to really elevate that opportunity. So who's going to be our Starbucks? Who's going to be our Walmart? And I think we have real corporate partners here who care a lot about this place that we call home and who are willing to come to the table with us. One last thought on this. Some of our campuses have property development opportunities. And I think about Nevada State down the road, which has a lot of undeveloped land. And the regents were very wise in hiring a president who has developed campus land before in her career through public-private opportunities. That part of the state is badly in need of additional medical facilities, healthcare opportunities. There are other industries looking at placement in Southern Nevada. That president is going to do amazing things in developing that land in a way, again, that meets our needs, serves our mission, and again, relieves our dependence on state appropriation.
Well, before we leave the subject of the budget, I did want to ask about accountability and transparency, because certainly NSHE's budget, I mean, look, state budgets are arcane and Byzantine by their very nature. NSHE's even more so, right? So do you think that the system's done enough, not even to be able to explain the budget to legislators, right, who are spinning many plates when they have to decide who gets what money, but that regular people can look at the budget and understand that their money's being well spent? Do you think that people can look at NSHE's money, $1 billion, and think that it's being stewarded wisely?
I would say we've made a lot of progress on that, and I think you will remember, Jacob, the first time we talked over a year ago when I first got here, I said I'm going to focus on innovation, inclusion, and transparency. And that is where we have been focused since my intention with that was shared. And on the transparency piece, I'll give you some examples of things we did differently in the 21 session to meet that very question. So again, we have a massive budget. We're a massive organization, 8 institutions, 107,000 students, 22,000 odd employees, roughly. Now, what really makes our budget complex compared to other public agencies is the number and diversity of our revenue streams. That's what is truly what makes us confusing, right? Because you have philanthropy, you have any number of auxiliary revenue streams, from housing to athletics to food courts and et cetera. So it's an incredibly complex budget. So the one thing I heard very, very clearly in talking to legislative leadership when I first arrived is, when you come to the Capitol and you make your budget presentation every other year, you only show us the half of the budget that comes from state appropriation and tuition. The other half comes from federal grants, all those auxiliaries, all the other things that I mentioned. And I said, well, that's an easy fix, right? That's an easy thing to solve. If that is part of the mystery, we have nothing to hide there. So our budget presentation in early 2021, and I have to credit CFO Andrew Klinger for doing a masterful job, pulled the curtain back, and we did our budget presentation on every revenue stream, whether it was a public Nevada source or, from federal research grants. And I don't think that's the entire solution, but I think it was a down payment on the relationship development that I'm keen to pursue, which is that we have nothing to hide and we need to show all of our revenue sources and show you how we spend them. And you can get on our website and look at our budget anytime you want. It's all there. I think the challenge is in the narrative, right? Is that looking at thousands and thousands of pages of budget is boring. And how many people other than you and I are going to do that? So part of it is in the narrative and in the delivery, and we're looking every day at ways to improve that.
Okay, well, I keep thinking of budget questions, so this is the real last one. But I did want to ask, because there's a distinct possibility that when we get to the legislature in 2023, that they're going to want to take a look at the funding formula that divvies up how that state money is spent. Right now, it operates per student credit hour for the institutions, and there's a big hole for community colleges, especially when it comes to non-degree seeking students. Right? If you're getting a certificate, are you counted through the formula as it exists now? I don't want to get into the technical debate over what is the right way to construct a higher education funding formula, but what I do want to ask is that, do you think that NSHE has the political capital right now to go to Carson City and argue not only for a favorable change to the funding formula to create equity between universities and community colleges, but, like we said, to handle all these other things, that you're spinning plates, that you're trying to increase the pie, that you're trying to deliver equity for these students, to non-traditional students, to minority students, right? How do you get all this done if this all comes to a head in 2023?
Well, you are really Debbie Downer. So, I have to say, what alternative do we have, right? But to be relentless and to make the case, because it is the right and good thing to do. And what I would say about the funding formula, and I had Regent conversations about the funding formula once I understood it, it is complex, It's a decade old, and if you think about it, in that decade, whether you liked that funding formula or not, in that decade, we've had the two worst economic downturns in 100 years. We've had a massive public health crisis. We've had all kinds of challenges around how better to serve through an equity lens. And we've had complete disruption in the higher education field. So it is ripe for reconsideration. And I think that our community college-focused regents are keen to have that conversation. We are fortunate that our new chair of the Board of Regents also serves on ACCT, a national organization representing community college trustees. First time NSHE has been represented there. And we are very serious about the equity question between institutions. And, you know, when I learned that our short-term badges, certificates, you know, unbundled credits that are really the ones that are designed to retool and get somebody back out onto the job site are not funded through the state appropriation, that's something we need to fix. And so to your question about political capital, there are a lot of people right now talking about fixing that challenge, with probably more political capital like me, right? People like Governor Sisolak, people like legislative leaders who are very keen to solve that challenge. And as you well know, we'll be launching the AB 450 committee here shortly, looking at community college issues, including funding. And I would not be surprised if that committee didn't produce some recommendations around this very point.
Well, I do want to finally switch gears, and I want to talk about COVID, something very cheery. So, you know, in the summer, things were great. In May, right, in June, and things were looking up, things were opening up. And then, obviously, we all remember Delta. It was a great time for all involved. And everyone had to switch gears, and that included NSHE. And I think there was a period of time between July and when the semester started in August where a lot of decisions had to be made. And I want to ask you, do you think that NSHE that your office, at the Regents, that everyone involved in governing higher education made the right calls in those 2 months before the semester started that made sure that we were operating in a safe environment when students came back to in-person classes this fall?
I am really proud of the decisions that we made. And I will say straight up, first of all, no one has ever done this before. So we have to take a little bit of a pause and give ourselves a little bit of a break. And remember, I don't have a mentor that I can call to say, hey, how was that with the Spanish flu, right? What did you do in the dorms? Did you require masks? There is no one to consult. So it's important to recognize, first and foremost, that we are creating the playbook as we need it, number one. Number two, we have been so focused on drawing from medical expertise at every single turn. And I have to credit my predecessor, Tom Riley, for setting up the system-wide COVID task force, which we rely on to this day. They met today. They continue to meet because the situation continues to evolve. And we have to stay on top of it, and we have to be driven by the science. And thirdly, I would say, and I know I've said this to you before, we were among the first 20% of colleges and universities in the nation to make a determination about the vaccine for our population. So that doesn't sound slow to me. That sounds like being a thought leader driven by science and best practice. So yes, I stand behind our decisions, and I think we are better for them.
So first of all, I want to say to everybody that we're going to start taking questions. You'll take questions from other people, right? As much as you like us.
As long as they're nice, as nice to me as you have been.
Fair enough. So if you have questions, please fill out the index cards, and Elizabeth's going to come around again. If you're watching on the live stream, please put your questions in the chat. We'll take questions after we finish this discussion of COVID. You may have noticed that in addition to a global pandemic, the world has actually also gone bonkers.
I've heard.
People think that if you make them wear a mask, that it is the worst thing that has happened since World War II, right? People think that if you have vaccine mandates, that you are being coercive and other terrible things. You have to deal with this. You have to deal with it, especially with young, impressionable kids, right, who are going to hear some of this stuff. What is the impact that you're seeing? Do you think that you're going to lose employees significantly? Do you think you're going to lose students significantly because of your nonsensical view of following the science?
Well, let's just talk about the numbers for a second. So as we sit here today on November 15th, 88% and change of our employees are fully vaccinated. And so there's a ways to go, obviously. And you all know, based on recent events, that on December 1st, any employees of NSHEs who have not demonstrated that they have completed the full course of the vaccinations will effectively get a notice of termination that is effective December 31st. And then after that, there is a grace period for reappointment if the person goes home and says, gosh, I would rather stay employed at NSHE and brings proof of vaccines. So we're a ways out yet from fully knowing the impact on the employee side. But every week I get those numbers in my inbox on Monday morning, reviewed them for this because I knew I'd get that question. And we've got about 1% of employees who have been granted an exemption, either for religious or medical purposes, that has gone through a review committee. And, I would be very sad if any NSHE employee chose to depart our institutions over this issue. We're always sad to see employees go for whatever reason. But I have still a lot of faith, as I said when the board was considering these issues, I have a lot of faith that we're going to get pretty darn close to complete vaccination by the time that we need to on the employee side. On the student side, there's some real complexity in the data that makes it harder for us to report consistently. And the reason is that you never know which students are planning to come back next semester anyway, and you get fresh students every semester, particularly at the community colleges. And I was talking to one president the other day who said to me, look, when I asked him, how is it looking from where you sit? Because students now can register for spring semester. And his response was, we have more students today registered for spring 2022 than we did on this exact date 1 year ago. And so in a way, that is the best predictor of all, that's the best measure of all, is to see our students coming in through registration processes, knowing that they also have a long time to complete their course of vaccinations, particularly on the community colleges where you can register all the way into the first week of classes. So there's a long tail here, which creates a lot of uncertainty, and we're doing everything within our control to provide these opportunities for students and faculty and staff. And so I hope that we will be in a really good place when January rolls along. But again, no one has ever done this before, so I can't go back to historic data and give you any reliable forecast.
I understand, and I'll let Jacob take over again in a second, but I understand the uncertainty about the students for the reasons that you just talked about. But you're going to know pretty soon about the faculty. And I assume you talk to faculty once in a while. So you must have some sense of what's percolating at each of these institutions.
Sure.
Does it seem like you're going to lose 5%, 10% of employees? What's the intel that you're picking up?
Well, I think it varies widely. I mean, I think you have to remember that our institutions are sprinkled throughout the state. And as a result, they are as ideologically diverse as the state is. And so you're going to see variances based on campuses. I think that's predictable. And so, of course, there is consternation in some places more than in other places. It's just the way that we're living this as a nation. So I don't think that that's unexpected. And what we want to do is make sure that we honor the policy that the board created and that we give our folks every opportunity possible to be vaccinated and stay part of the NSHE family.
You're not going to give me a number?
Nope.
Okay. Jacob, anything else on COVID?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on that specifically really quickly because, I mean, looking at the numbers, it's about 2,500 employees are still unvaccinated according to NSHE's own count. And, we've got 2 weeks before December 1st-ish. So are we looking at 2,000? I mean, you told the Regents in September that you didn't expect it would be in the thousands, but right now it's over 2,500. So
I think it's 2,300, but in any case, it's, I will say this, every week those numbers are moving in the right direction. We're already over 88% fully vaccinated. So we're not capturing the people who have had the first shot of their 2-shot course. We're not even capturing them. And so I can't give you a number because this is a novel environment. And it would be foolish of me to tell you what number we're going to land on.
Well, real quick, one last follow-up on this.
You keep saying that.
I do.
I love Jacob's style on this. He's great. It's just great.
But, when we talk about 100, okay, say it's a couple hundred, right? It took several weeks beyond what the state said. When this initial vaccine, there was a vaccine test regime in the sort of early August period that was put in place by the governor's office for state employees that includes NSHE employees. Mm-hmm. And that took weeks. It was a heavy HR lift to get that in place to figure out who was even vaccinated in the first place. Mm-hmm. Now, at the possibility that we might possibly fire somewhere between dozens and hundreds of people because of this, is that an HR disaster for NSHE?
I would say there are dozens or hundreds possibly who may choose to leave NSHE over this issue, and that is a terrible loss. It's a shame. We hope that that doesn't happen. And that's why we have made a reasonable timeline with progressive sanctions, right? This is not abrupt, but it is for the health and safety and well-being of our entire community. So I would say throughout this entire public health nightmare, we've had 2 responsibilities. Number 1 is the health and life safety of our communities. That is a very serious moral obligation to a large number of individuals. And we have leaned into that, I think, very effectively in a very uncertain and fluid environment. And the second obligation, which is a very close second, is to retain or go back to in-person learning. And we can only consistently deliver in-person learning if we've met the first requirement, which is health and life safety.
All right, I think we're going to take some questions now. And I'm not surprised with our usual sophisticated audience, Chancellor, that we've gotten some really good questions for you. So let me start with the hardest one. I can't wait to see her reaction to this one. What method would you prefer for the election or selection of regents?
I have regents out there. Maybe I can I phone a friend? I'll give you the same answer I've given Jacob probably half a dozen times, which is that I was not hired to opine on governing structures. I wasn't.
Oh, stop clapping. It's a total dodge. Come on.
What did you expect?
That is exactly what I expected.
I don't want to answer that question any more than you want to talk about the Michigan State game 2 weeks ago.
Oh, my God. You know what? She had that in her back pocket the whole time. There's no doubt about it. And by the way, I've been relatively nice despite her wearing green. No. Did you vote for question 1?
I voted against question 1.
Tell me why.
I was concerned about the uncertainty that it presented. And, you know, I've worked in a lot of governing structures. I've worked for all three major forms of higher education governing structures. So I've worked for gubernatorial appointed regents, I've worked for elected regents, and I've worked in private higher education for a self-generating board, which is what they have in private universities. And I would just say, there is no form of governance that is perfect, not one. If there was a perfect form of governance, every university system would have it. So it's not my job to settle this question. I'm not going to answer you in the way that you want. I was hired to fulfill the NSHE mission to the best of my ability by moving forward our objectives around student success. And I'm going to stay focused there and leave it to the people of Nevada to decide.
Hey, I got what I wanted. You told me how you voted on question 1, and I appreciate your candor on that, actually. Let me read this. This is an interesting one. Higher education nationally, and NSHE specifically, are not immune to the Great Resignation. It's going all over the place. What do you say to those who are reconsidering their careers now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and here's where the political scientist in me comes out. You know, we know a lot about what a difficult time we're living through. We're living through an uncivil time. We're living through a time where there is just a terrible evisceration of the trust of Americans in institutions of all kinds. And we're living through a time where people, I think, have had terrible loss or fear of loss because of COVID. And I think it's a very human thing to reconsider what we're doing with ourselves every day. Am I serving a purpose? Am I living the life that I want to be living? And I have to say, from just a very human standpoint, I respect that introspection that we're, I think, collectively having. I, however, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, I figured that was coming right at the end. Your thoughts on UNLV's R1 status. What should we as a community be doing, thinking about in regards to keeping the R1 status?
Yeah, it's a huge achievement and a really important one, and it's a challenging thing to maintain. And so, you know, I'm so grateful to President Whitfield, who brings incredible experience with R1 institutions and research chops. I mean, gosh, the guy's got a publication list a mile long and continues to publish, which is very impressive. And so he's going to be keenly focused on the things that R1 is judged on, which has to do with laboratory space, your faculty and their achievements and their appointments and publications. And those are the things where we need to continue our investments. So, you know, Jacob's poking me about our chops in the legislature, but I will say we got our money back on the med school for UNLV, and we also got the money for the engineering school at UNLV. It's a big deal, and those are down payments on the maintenance of R1 status and hopefully rising up the ranks.
How is NSHE working to support students in accessing scholarships and grants to reduce their debt burden? What's your opinion of the student loan debt cancellation movement? Do you feel it would benefit current students and increase enrollment in the future?
Yeah, well, students, of course, will tell us that the number one barrier to entry is obviously economics. And so we have to do everything we can to lower the price and lower the burden of going to college to our students. And I feel like our institutions do an incredible job, both on the philanthropic side of making sure that they are raising dollars to alleviate that burden for our students, but also simply in the counseling component to that, right? The educating families about what the opportunities are. This was a real problem for me as a first-generation college student. I didn't understand, and I had no one in my family to explain to me that the sticker price, and this is more true for private universities than public, but still, the sticker price is relatively arbitrary. Really. So when I went and I got into 2 colleges, I got into UC Santa Cruz and I got into Loyola Marymount. And I thought the sticker price was the sticker price. And I didn't have counselors and I didn't have parents to tell me, no, you're poor, that's not what you're actually going to pay. So a big part of the commitment has to be around the counseling, FAFSA, which is a nightmare. I have to fill it out every year for my own kids. I've been in this business for 30 years and I struggle. And luckily there are some reforms to FAFSA on the federal level which will help too. But there's never going to be enough from my perspective in the educational component about how to finance a degree.
You know, Loyola Marymount has a much better basketball team than Santa Cruz will ever have.
I don't think Santa Cruz has a basketball
That's
team.
exactly right. So here's a question we got from one of our live stream viewers. The country has seen a decline in the number of men enrolling and completing college. What comes to mind to address this growing gender gap to ensure men enroll in and complete college?
This is a really important issue, and it hasn't gotten enough traction in higher education circles. It is a deeply concerning trend that men are trailing off in their college-going rates, and in particular African American men and Latino men. And it is a very serious problem, and I'm really pleased to tell you that we've got a couple of incredible presidents who have leaned into this work, specifically around bringing the necessary conversations and supports to those culturally specific populations. And I'm really just pleased to see that we're taking up that challenge. And, you know, the challenge, too, there is that the barriers for those populations don't start when you're 18, right? The barriers have been growing and mounting for years within a child's life. And so again, this is where we have to go back and think of ourselves as a continuous system and think about little ones and how our colleges and universities can have a real presence for those young boys in grade school.
All right, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up, Chancellor. I really do appreciate all of your time tonight and your willingness to take all of these questions. How do you convince parents who are disillusioned by school boards and state legislators concerned with our state debt and deficit to bet, as you put it, on NSHE? What's the case to parents and their legislators? What's the case you make?
Well, look, I've made the case. I mean, the case is about the benefits that come to an individual and his or her community in perpetuity for getting a college degree. I mean, again, I'm sorry to use myself as the example, but you know what my children have been able to experience because they have a college-educated family is stunning to me. It's a completely different life experience than how I was raised. And so the benefits of my having gone to college are not just to me, right? I think that we need to think about the social benefits of an individual getting a college degree. It's not just about the fact that you can raise more money. It's about the fact that you can change other lives. And we have to lean into that. And I would tell them, run for school board.
School board members should be appointed. Just like regents should be appointed. I can't. No reaction. Look at that. That's impressive. All right. Let me read. This is a good one. If NSHE's funding is enough for our students to be funded right around the national average, which is what you said, but we're ranked 47th in the country for adults with a college degree, isn't the problem more operational, or what is the problem?
This is where I am so excited to be launching strategic planning. Because what is, you all know, you're business people, what is measured gets managed. And I am so thrilled that we're launching strategic planning, really the first comprehensive strategic planning effort in 20 years at NSHE. And it's we're designing this in a way that I fondly refer to as a y'all come form of strategic planning, which is that we will be hosting listening sessions all over the state in every community where we have a presence to hear from nonprofit organizations, businesses, educators, et cetera, about what you all need from us. And I think that in doing that, we will, in the end, sift out a set of strategic priorities with measurable goals that hold us accountable, for which we are transparent. And I think that we will move the dial because we will be measuring our intended outcomes more religiously than we currently are.
I want to wrap up, and I'm going to kind of distill a question there that's kind of long, but it was something that I've been wondering about since you said it. And the answer may seem obvious, but maybe it's not. And let's wrap up with this. You have kind of made the case that if we're going to diversify economically as a state, there has to be a partnership with the higher education system. Describe what the nexus is. Explain that. Like, why can't you just get more money from the gaming industry? They have a lot of money, right? Why do we need to diversify? Does it have to do with changing the culture? What is the reason? Draw the nexus for us.
Well, let me first separate workforce development from economic diversification, because I think too oftentimes they're used interchangeably, and they're really different things. So workforce development, which is part of our current strategic goals, is really about taking employees who need retooling for existing industry here, present in Nevada now. Right? So we work very closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Development in order to do gap analysis, right? You tell us what jobs are out there and what skills are needed. We map that against our certificates, our badges, our associate's degrees. We do a gap analysis, and we move forward in providing what is necessary. Economic diversification is really about it's like having a stock portfolio when all you own is Intel. Some years, that's going to be fantastic, right? Other years, it's going to be devastating to you, right? They don't produce new chips. They have supply chain issues with their chips. Your stock goes down. Your portfolio stinks. So if we have an economy in Southern Nevada that is over-reliant on hospitality and gaming, then when you shut down the Strip, the entire economy bottoms out, and we all suffer the consequences. So the imperative for economic diversification is to have a diverse portfolio so that we have our eggs in multiple baskets. And in order to diversify, to bring new industries that are not here yet in Southern Nevada, frankly, the way that Northern Nevada did after the 2008 Great Recession with Tesla and Panasonic and others, what you have to do is work with higher education. Number one, they're going to be creating new companies, right? You have the opportunities at UNLV to innovate and to come up with tech transfer opportunities to create new businesses out of our university, right there. So the spin-offs that they can create contribute to this diversification. But there's also, I think, a synergistic relationship when we have industries looking at Southern Nevada and shopping around. Well, what would it be like for us to bring our hundreds or thousands of employees here? The questions they ask are about the quality of life. The questions they ask are about what are the educational opportunities for my family. And that is where we come in. So to me, more closely tying our economic development entities within NSHE and truly working as partners on this future for our state is absolutely, obviously a passion.
Indeed, we can tell that. I want to thank first Jacob for coming up and asking all these great questions. Thanks for doing what you did. Chancellor, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. It was great to meet you in person, and I'm sure everybody here feels that this was a really productive conversation to have. So thank you, for coming as well. And most of all, though, I do want to thank everybody watching in the live stream and everybody who's here and wasn't forced to be here because they work for the Chancellor. But seriously, I want to thank everybody because you believe what Elizabeth and I and the rest of the Indy staff believe, which is that these kinds of high-level conversations, talking about these kinds of issues in an intelligent way, is the way to make this a better community and a better state. So thank you to all of you for coming, for watching. We really appreciate it.